Welcome. Is this on? Welcome. Try this again. Is that on?
Yes, sir.
All right. Great. Thank you for coming. I'm glad to see you all here. This is just really exciting to see this kind of turnout. We've had a great day with Luke so far. We had a workshop with Luke yesterday, actually. And it was called Meet Me in the Middle. It was a depolarization workshop, which I got a lot out of, and I think the rest of us did. And then we had a debate on gun control, on ban on assault rifles and other forms of gun control, and really had a fun time. I mean, we debated for how long did we go? 2 hours, maybe?
2.5, yeah.
2.5 hours. So, and it was great. Very vigorous debate. Passionate but respectful, and we had a great time. It was I had fun. One of the students, I asked them to make a little respond to the event, and he wrote, "This class was thrilling." And I thought, I don't get that word very often. So it was just so exciting. And this student was very engaged in the debate, and so we had a lot of fun. So we have with us again Luke Nathan Phillips from DC, who is he in his job title has the word Publius. Now, what is it? What's your technical title? It's Publius.
I am the Publius Fellow for Public Discourse at Braver Angels. I just chair debates.
So he gets Publius in his job title. Where do you go to get a job like that? That's what I want to know. So at any rate, this evening our debate is on it's on critical race theory. I almost said cancel culture. It's on critical race theory, and it's a little bit confusing because the resolution is a not, right? So if you're pro, you have to go, okay, then I'm pro for the not. So critical race theory should not be taught in public schools is the resolution. And Luke, take it away.
Well, Joel, thank you for all this. Dakota Wesleyan University and Mitchell, South Dakota have been becoming places that I enjoy a whole heck of a lot over the last 18 months or so. And it's good to see all of you here again. There's a lot of familiar faces and there's a couple of new faces, and it is good to be back here on the high Great Plains with all of you. I'm glad that the Braver Angels debates are becoming a little bit of a tradition for the community out here, and I will look forward to many, many more months and years of this with all of you here. So who here has been to these Braver Angels debates that we've done here before? Just raise your hands if you've been. Okay, so some of you are familiar with the process. Those of you who are not familiar with the process, I will give you a very brief overview, and then we will hop right into speeches. But long story short, the Braver Angels debates are not like the Lincoln Douglas style of debates that you might have seen various wannabe presidents of the United States doing on stage with each other at some point or other every 4 years. A Braver Angels debate is more like a Socratic seminar moderated by a light form of parliamentary procedure. Our founder of it, April Lawson, has called it a collective search for truth. And at a quite literal level, it is basically a bunch of Americans of various understandings of things sitting around in a circle and talking about their feelings about politics. And we really strongly believe at Braver Angels that that model is something that is useful for all sorts of things. It gives us a chance to do democratic stump oratory. It gives us a chance to be our true selves rather than the contorted selves our culture asks us to be. And I think that if you do it right, you can walk out of a debate on any topic, no matter how controversial, no matter how complicated, no matter how personal, and no matter how complex, and you can come out of that debate with a deeper understanding of the issues at stake, a deeper understanding of your opponents and your rivals, and sometimes even a little bit of a deeper understanding of yourself. And so all we're doing in this Braver Angels debate is trying to do that on one of the most interesting and complex and sometimes fiery questions sweeping the American culture and education communities in our present day, the question of critical race theory and how it ought or ought not be taught in public schools. So let me read you some quick details on the rules of this real quick, and then we will get started right from there. So the way this will work is we have a resolution and we will have individuals in this crowd come up, stand in the middle, and give speeches on the resolution. You can give a speech in the affirmative, you can give a speech in the negative. Giving a speech in the affirmative or in the negative does not mean that you are firmly on that side. It does not mean that you are being defined by us in some particular way. It merely is a fulcrum, a tool by which to approach the issue. And then when you give your speech, you are welcome to be as nuanced or as complicated or as whatever your actual opinions are. So you'll be giving a speech in the affirmative or the negative. Those usually go about 3 or 4 minutes. If you go longer, just be funny and I will let you keep going. After your speech, you will be thanked, and then you will stay up in the middle of the room here, and your fellow members of this debate will ask you questions. And you will have opportunity to answer those questions. Now, it is really important that while we're in the course of this debate, nobody refers to anybody else by their first names or by the second person pronoun you. You can only refer to other people in this debate in the third person. He, she, they, the gentleman, the lady, the individual, the speaker. You can only refer to them in third person, and the only person who you can refer to in second person is me. And you have to refer to me as Mr. Chair or the chairman over the course of this debate. And you need to address all of your questions and all of your statements to me, Mr. Chair. I have a gavel, and I will knock my gavel and knock it annoyingly if you refer to each other in the second person pronoun. We do that to keep the focus on the issues and keep the attention in the center of the room rather than going to what could be heated interpersonal disputes. And it also is a way that we have found keeps the focus on something higher. It makes a safe space for free speech, if you want to think about it that way. And it also allows everybody to be as personal and vulnerable as they want, and as they really are in public in a way that is a very judgment-free zone where our vulnerabilities and our own deepest understandings of things are actually quite useful for this debate. So, that's a long, flowery way of saying don't call anybody directly and only talk to me while I'm here. So there's that. Address me as Mr. Chair, no second person pronouns, only third person. Please don't clap. Instead of clapping, you will note that these chairs here, and Alethea and Liz and others, would you mind helping me demonstrate this? These chairs that you're on here, bang them louder, yep, that's good. These chairs are nice and hollow, and if you hit them with the flat of your hand, will make a nice hollow sound that is deep and reverberating, and also will not drown out the sound of someone's voice on a microphone. So if you hear something that you like, if you hear something that you agree with, or if you hear something that you find amusing, or whatever, don't clap. Instead, do what we call banging on your chair or on the chair next to you, to express approval of something that you just heard. So, for the moment, and only for the moment, pretend I'm an interesting, attractive, charismatic, useful, fundamentally positive influence in your life, and you like everything that I just said. What are you going to do? Thank you. I'll be here all night. Okay, so do that for each other. It feels really good to be supported that way when you're on the floor. So, okay, so there's that, and then additionally, I mentioned this before, but when you speak, you'll give your speech from the middle. When your fellow audience members ask questions, they will stand, and when they stand and you give your answer to them, they'll stay standing until you finish giving your answer. Let's see. I think that's all of the specific rules on format, but let me tell you a couple culture rules here real quick too. We only debate hard issues. We only debate things that people can actually get angry about, because those are the things that politics is based on. Those are the things that really make politics what it is. We don't shy away from them. We sometimes debate straightforward policy issues too that are hard to get angry about, but those are usually the exception. The things that we debate, including the topic tonight, are things that can quite literally be life and death, and always, at the very least, go down to the very core of who we are. We believe that that everybody's voice matters on all these things, because these are things that really do count for how we define ourselves in public life. And so I just want to be absolutely, critically, totally, completely clear that in the context of this debate, everyone in the room is welcome to speak. That includes you guys who are doing the audio-visual stuff. Thank you guys for being here. And that includes everybody who's here, whether they're a faculty or a student or a member of the community or just passing through town for a little bit or whatever. Everyone's voice is equal, and everyone's voice will be heard. Another rule, say what you believe. Don't feel compelled to defend positions that you don't actually believe. Don't feel compelled to be more on a side than you actually are, including when you're speaking in the affirmative or in the negative. When you're here, you are here as yourself, and I promise you, if you be yourself in this, you will say things that will enlighten all the rest of us and help contribute to the context of this debate. And the last rule is just merely a restatement of that other rule. Feel free to be as eloquent, as awkward, as skeptical, as certain, as intuitive, as inquisitive, as passionate, or as logical, or as rational as you really are. And if you do that, you will help with this great chorus of the Union and this great conversation of democracy that keeps America going forward all the time. Additionally, if you're worried about speaking because you think you're too awkward, I promise you, I am way more awkward than you, so you shouldn't let feeling awkward about it be a reason not to speak. Any questions? All right. With that, then, we will go ahead and get started. As the chair, I call this debate to order. The resolution on the table is resolved. Critical race theory should not be taught in public schools. Resolved, critical race theory should not be taught in public schools. I am looking for a first speech in the affirmative. The gentleman with the 2 pens in his left pocket.
After I get done with my presentation, or maybe before then, you can decide whether I'm adhering to one of his rules, which is to say what you really believe. So let me clarify why I signed on at the last minute to be in the affirmative in a proposition where a number of you in the audience would say, what is he doing up there saying that? Because it doesn't fit who you know. You're free to laugh as much as you like. Okay. Let me proceed by looking at some definitions. What else would an academic do? First of all, I'll make this statement. Many versions of critical race theory are what is commonly referred to as single-factor theories of history and socio-political dynamics. In the case of critical race theory, race. Now, you may think that's a straw man, but I am here to say that as I watch the discussion, I find people on both sides of the issue engaging in this fairly highly defined way of looking at things. That is to say, there's a single factor to explain American history and American politics, and it's race. So if you ask me why am I, in the first instance, why am I opposed to having critical race theory as defined in that sentence taught in the public schools, it's because I'm opposed to any single factor theory. If you're not clear exactly what I mean by single factor theory, think about some of the following. A century or more ago, there was a famous historical volume which tried to explain all of American history by class, economic class, the so-called Beard hypothesis. More recently, we've had a lot of effort to try to explain American dynamics by gender. We've also had efforts to do it by religion, and you can go down the line. And every one of these has had strong, powerful advocates for a single explanation for what makes us as an American culture tick. And so if that's where you come from, then I'm opposed to having that kind of theory taught in the public schools. Frankly, I'm opposed to having it taught any place, but I'll start with the public schools. Now, I would support inclusion of concepts drawn from any of these theories in the teaching of history and political dynamics in our culture. So, for example, out of critical race theory, and I'm sure some of the other speakers here will address this question, there's a lot of attention given to what's called structural racism, or there's more modern terminology for it, but I'll revert to what I was teaching back in the 1970s, lest you think that this is a new idea. It's been around for a long time. And I would argue that you can't understand dynamics of American culture without having some understanding of what we mean by structural racism. I won't get into that. I'll leave it to some of my follow-on speakers to wrestle with that, as I assume some of them will. Another example would be language. I would certainly want to have some discussion in public schools about the impact of language on people's ability to function in society and on equitable and inequitable arrangements. But I'm not prepared to endorse a theory for which language is the be-all and end-all. That would be another classic example of a single-factor theory. Now, let me switch to one other topic, and then I'll quit. Some versions of critical race theory interpret teaching as a means of promoting a particular point of view. Critics of that would call it indoctrination. I would oppose any pedagogy, including the highly Eurocentric pedagogy which has dominated American education for so many years, lost my train of thought here. In other words, I don't want a pedagogy which promotes a particular point of view to the exclusion of others. Unless you think that's another straw man, I think you just need to look at the debates that go on, both in the legislature and in the public press, about how frequently people make these statements about the other side, and they're doing it themselves. From my point of view, the goal of education, whether it's public or private, whatever level it is to promote awareness of alternatives and of critical thinking about those alternatives. And so if you're going to have critical race theory taught in the public schools as a pedagogy, some of you may be familiar with the term pedagogy of the oppressed, which is a famous doctrine adopted a generation ago by some Latin Americans, which argued that the function of education was not just to open up minds and teach critical thinking, but to develop a revolutionary cadre who were going to take over and run things. So I'll leave it at that. For those two reasons, I would oppose critical race theory understood as a unified single-factor theory, and I would oppose pedagogy in any school system, which is indoctrination.
And with that, the speaker is thanked for his excellent and illuminating first speech in the affirmative. We have time for questions for the speaker. I'm looking for, if you have a question for the speaker, please raise your hand. If anybody has any questions for the speaker, please feel free to raise your hand. Yes, the lady in the black blouse. And please
And I believe I
rise.
address it to you, correct?
Yes, but please stand.
Oh, stand, yes.
Yep.
All right,
Thank
Mr.
you,
Chair.
ma'am.
I would like to know if the speaker would believe in the critical race theory being presented as one of several theories in encouraging students to explore the various historical theories that are used to explain the development of American culture.
Excellent question. Please remain standing, Mr. Speaker.
The short answer is yes. But I think I would probably be more inclined to unpack it and every other theory and say, what are some of the pieces of this theory which are most important? So if I were to look at critical race theory, I would go back and say structural racism, the idea that things can have adverse consequences as a result of race without my intending it to be that way. If you can't understand that, you can't understand American culture, but you can still have a fairly wide-ranging debate about what kinds of things actually produce that. Now, just to clarify, and I don't want to go on too long here, but I don't want to steal thunder from some other folks that are going to be making presentations, but the classic example of structural racism was redlining in real estate, where, as a matter of policy, We simply didn't make mortgages available to people in certain income and racial categories. The consequence of which was to put a whole subgroup of people behind the 8 ball, population-wise. If you, in your education about the American culture, you need to understand that. It doesn't mean that if you buy into that as a concept, it makes you a racist or an anti-racist. It just means it's a concept that needs to be addressed.
And with that excellent first speech, the speaker and his questioners are thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I am now looking for a first speech in the negative. The lady in the blouse. You have around 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I am against the resolution that CRT should not be taught in public schools. I'm an instructor in the social sciences, and for the first time that I can remember this past fall, the fall of 2022, CRT showed up in one of my textbooks. Now, perhaps it had been there before, and I just didn't notice it because it honestly wasn't a big deal. But it is now, and so we are here. I do not see the problem with students learning about CRT when you consider the most important word in the title, and it's not critical and it's not race, it's theory. Because theory, as many in here I'm sure know because we're all educated people, a theory is an idea, an explanation based on someone's observations of the world. Once a person establishes that theory, they, share it. They have researched it. They have done studies on it. They've shared it with their colleagues. They've had it evaluated. They've had it tested. It's perhaps been amended. It's perhaps been rejected, or it's perhaps been accepted. Freud had an interesting theory. Yes, he did. Thank you. Freud's psychosexual theory was something. Some of the components of that include the Oedipus complex, in which he believed that all little boys were in love with their mothers and wanted to murder their fathers. He also believed that little girls had a similar one called the Electra complex, and that all little girls were in love with their fathers and wanted to murder their mothers. It's amazing we're all here. Now, Freud's theory, as far as I know, hasn't been banned recently, and it's potentially still talked about. When I've taught general psychology, I know we talked about Freud's theory. And why hasn't it? Because it's a theory, and it's been challenged and tested and amended and honestly mostly rejected today, right? But we still talk about it because Freud is a historical importance in the field of psychology, and he was one of the first people who was trying to explain human behavior. We had to start somewhere. Now, critical race theory, I don't claim to be an expert, not in any way, shape, or form, but I also know that it is also not necessarily that new. It's been around for over 40 years. I believe it developed not long after the civil rights movement in the 70s and 80s is when it was brought about. So it's not that old, or it's not that new. It's kind of old, though. But when I teach about theories, which I am guessing most teachers do, I present the information. What are the main tenets of the theory? Who came up with it? What critiques has it received? Is it still seen as viable, as valid? And then I ask my students to critically think about it. How do they feel about it? Does it fit with their observations of the world or not? And when I taught about CRT this past fall, I presented that information along with the information about several theories of race. And again, I asked my students which one made the most sense to them based on their experience. And isn't that what we want for our students? Don't we want them to critically think, to evaluate others' ideas, and decide whether they believe them? What is the fear factor in doing that with CRT? That some students might believe it? Well, if they do, the next step would be, it's time to research it. It's time to justify why you believe that by doing studies. If they do believe that, then that's what their next step should be. That's called research. That sounds like solid educational lessons to me, and that is why I'm against this resolution. You don't ban theories or ideas, you discuss them.
And with that excellent speech in the negative, the speaker is thanked. We now have time for questions for the speaker. Anybody have a question for the speaker? Please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. Yes, the gentleman in the white, can you please bring it back to him? Thank you, out there.
I think that some of the criticism of CRT, you addressed in
The speaker
the
addressed.
speaker addressed.
I didn't address anything.
Yeah, that's right. Other than a letter, yes. The word assumption. I assume that most teachers present it in that way. I think the problem is, from my own experience in college 50 years ago, from the experience of current students, and this is personal, some on the media, but yes, the media on either side is gone to the extremes, unfortunately. Sorry, JP, the networks. But is that there are those instructors, be they in the public schools or be it at the college level, who present a theory as the truth. And how I can't count the number of students who have told me, if you don't agree with the professor, you're going to get flunked. So they say, I went through and I agreed with the whatever proponent thing that instructor was proposing.
Sir, would
And I think that's a problem.
Would you make a point of asking this as a question?
Yes. So how would one address those kind of instructors or professors who are out there? And I think that's where some of the criticism is coming from.
Excellent question. Thank you for that, Madam
Okay.
Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Chair. How I would answer that, in my experience, is that sounds like a problem with the instructor, not with the theory. And that, I would say, is up to teacher education, partially. And also, I would encourage students, if they feel like they have been put in that position, and let's see, are any of mine in the room? Shoo! If they have felt that way, that they would speak to either the professor or the academic dean or whoever the supervisor is, if that's the way they have been made to feel. I can relate. I would say that I had experiences like that at the undergrad level as well, that I thought that, I needed to agree. I would hope as an instructor that I don't do that. I usually respond to students that I may disagree with I may disagree with you, but I respect your opinion, and that's really what all instructors or professors should be doing.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The chair will merely note that while instructors, in fact, may sometimes be fallible, debate chairs are never fallible. So, I am looking for a second speech in the affirmative. I'm looking for a second speech in the affirmative. Do we have a second speech in the affirmative on this resolution? Great. The gentleman in the blue blazer and the dark blue pants. You have around 4 minutes.
Thank you. I am making this speech in the affirmative mainly because I can't quite figure out which side to claim, but we'll give this a try. I'm in the affirmative in the qualified sense, and similarly to Dave Mitchell, in the qualified sense that perhaps critical race theory doesn't fit a typical high school experience or elementary school experience to be taught as theory. But it's still a helpful way to think about race. And it's been helpful, and the reason I want to say this is it's been helpful for me as a way to think about race. And by that I mean I have come to realize that there are many instances where, and this is to me the biggest and most profound truth that might be connected to critical race theory is the notion that racism functions just fine without racists. So a lot of people have the impression that critical race theory teaches that all white folks are racist and that American history is thoroughly and 100% evil. But that is certainly not. In fact, it does quite the opposite in my case, or at least the way I understand it, in the sense that it helps to understand how race can be baked into culture or education or law or business in ways that are that are kind of hard to see if you've grown up in the system. And I would like to just share a few of those examples that I've become aware of. And one of them is from right in the educational institution. As you know, one of the primary ways one generation passes on wealth to the next is through scholarships at universities. And so as scholarships are allocated, one of the things that is often required of the person that's filling out the application for the scholarship is that they are involved in, say, 40 or 60 or 80 hours of service in their communities. And of course, we all, I'm the director of the McGovern Center for Leadership and Service, right? I'm a fan of service and organized service. I'm working on organizing a service day right now. But the fact is, we increasingly became aware of the fact that certain people growing up in certain environments dedicating that time to service was extremely difficult, much more difficult than the typical middle-class person, And so this is not necessarily racism, it's more classism, but still, because we know African-American families have about a tenth of the income of your typical Caucasian or non-European-based family, that these things are intersected. And so we had a student that actually pointed out, a student of color, that pointed out that, I couldn't do that. I was working 30 hours a week in our business, and I just couldn't do that. I was working to, pay the electrical bill for the family. And, made an appeal, could I still get the scholarship? And I think that to some of us, it's like our eyes were opened and we realized, oh my goodness, we didn't think of the fact that to certain people, this is an extremely high barrier that is a lot easier for kids that grow up in your typical middle-class families. And so that is an instance where critical race theory can help people to see, and you don't really even need this theory, but you just need the openness to recognize that there are instances where we can create disadvantage unintentionally. Now, is Dakota Wesleyan University filled with racists that don't want people to succeed, and that's why there's this inequitable policy? Absolutely not. Racism exists without racists. And it's because it's built in, and very often people who are from are from the middle class have a difficult time seeing. In fact, Dave shared with me this example just yesterday, and I thought it was a really interesting one, that a lot of times, if let's say a person wants to go to D.C. and do an internship at a Senate office, or an internship at a law office in D.C., and it's very often these internships, which are an extremely helpful step into very lucrative jobs, pay virtually nothing. And so people that grow up in an underprivileged background virtually have no access to those opportunities because they just can't afford going and living in D.C. for a summer or 8 months to work in these law offices, which means they have a lot higher barrier to break into the middle class. And it's those kinds of things that critical race theory claims, that racism gets baked into things. And there's a great book on racism right now called Racism Without Racists. And it explains how critical race theory can be invisible to those of us that have grown up.
Mr. Speaker, you're a little over time. Take 45 seconds.
No, I'm good. That's all.
Okay. With that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will note that this sounded to me like it actually should have been a speech in the negative, not in the affirmative.
Yeah,
because you argued that critical race theory is useful for understanding things. It's useful,
but I don't know how effective it is to teach it as a theory in public schools.
Okay, in that case, can I give you 1 minute to make a point on that part? Great. Take 1 minute so that I can count this as a speech in the affirmative.
Okay.
1 minute.
Well, actually, I'm kind of echoing what Dave said here, that the critical race theory has been a topic in sociology courses in graduate school, and so whether or not it should be taught in public school in the sense of high school and elementary schools, I don't like the idea of saying, here is the theory, we're teaching it in the sense that you have to somehow agree with it. It's a way of thinking that can be helpful. And so I don't know, teaching it as a theory in the sense of teaching it as if this is the truth and this is our way of explaining things, as if it's the single unitary factor, is just not a helpful way to approach the issue.
And with that clarification, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, but please stay standing. We have time for questions for the speaker. Do we have questions for the speaker? Any questions for the speaker? Yes, sir, in the back. Thank you, Alethea. Alethea is serving as my whip today, and she is being very helpful, so thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, the question I ask is, how do we fix it so it can be taught in public schools? How do we fix it?
Excellent question, Mr. Speaker.
I'm not sure how to answer that. This question has never arisen in my, I mean, I think that there are ways of teaching it in the sense of talking about instances where there can be disadvantaged for certain people that because they didn't grow up in a certain background. So, for instance, if there's a reading test and there's an essay about, I thought of this example the other day. Let's say it's an essay of a person who had great memories of eating dinner at their grandma's house every Sunday afternoon, and she would serve the meal on bone china, and they'd drink tea with a saucer. I mean, there are certain people that just they've never heard of China as anything other than a nation in the Far East, and they've never drunk tea out of a saucer. And so if you don't have that cultural background, those kinds of things can be you're at a disadvantage. And so I think to become aware of where these things are a disadvantage and trying to alleviate those instances, that's much more important than teaching it as a theory, I think. So.
And with that, the speaker and his questioners are thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. All right, we are going to go to a second speech in the negative, but before I call for that, I just want to let everybody know that we do have a couple of preliminary speakers slotted out, and those are the ones who we've been calling on so far. We have a couple more of those to get through, but we are going to have open floor pretty shortly, and those of you who might have thoughts mulling and thoughts coming up will be more than welcome and more than invited to raise your hands to give speeches that are coming up to mind as we go through here, particularly y'all young people around here too. I'm excited to bring more people into this conversation as well. So with that, I'm looking for a second speech in the negative. Do we have a second speaker in the negative? Joe? Joe? The affirmative is resolved. Critical race theory should not be taught in schools. You're in the affirmative. Got it. Okay, well, in that case, given that Joel just gave a speech that was partly negative and partly affirmative, how about we go instead now to a speech in the affirmative, and you can be partly negative in it too if you like, but whichever you prefer. So you have around 4 minutes or so.
Thank you. So I'm a sociologist. That's my background, right? And we study, one of the things sociologists study is systemic inequality, right? And at the end of the day, that's really what critical race theory is getting at. And we can talk about systemic inequalities outside of race. I've bumped into some statistics recently that are very depressing regarding senior women, right? So senior women in the United States have a much higher rate of poverty than senior men, right? I have the statistics here somewhere. Women over 65 are more likely to be poorer than men across all demographic groups. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter whether you're Hispanic, black, right? Divorced, widowed, right? They're all poorer than men. Now, why is that? There's a couple different reasons. What? First reason is what? Women make 75 cents on the dollar that men make, right? So there's wage inequality in our society, right? Secondly, women, right, often take time off out of the labor force to have children and raise children and work part-time jobs. Consequently, they pay much less into Social Security in the United States than male counterparts do, right? So they have smaller Social Security fund to draw on when they eventually retire. And this is, nobody intended this to happen, right? Nobody gets up in the morning and rubs their hands together and says, I want to make old women poor, right? So it's not any sort of animosity on anyone's part. It's structural inequality in our society, right? The challenge is it's extraordinarily difficult to address and to try and fix, right? It's an overwhelming problem. And race is similar. When we look at racial inequality in our society, right, and many of the previous speakers have mentioned this same sort of thing, we look at wealth, right? The average white family has 10 times the wealth of the average black family, right? Average wealth of a white family runs at about $170,000, which is not a lot, but the average wealth of a black family is like $17,000, right? Average black college graduate owes $25,000 more in student loan debt than their white counterpart. Okay, you can look at life expectancy. The average life expectancy of a black person in the United States is about 70 years, 70 to 71 years. Average life expectancy for a white person is about 76 years, right? You look at all sorts of diseases, whether you look at diabetes, right, heart disease, these rates all run higher in the black community than they do in the white community. And this isn't because people wake up in the morning and decide that, we want black people's lives to be shorter than white people's lives, or we want black people to be poorer than white people. These are systemic inequalities that are baked into our society, as a former speaker suggested. Okay? The reason I would say that perhaps we shouldn't be teaching, if we think about critical race theory as really drawing people's attention to these systemic inequalities, the reason I would suggest we shouldn't teach it, particularly in elementary school, is it's disempowering, right? Back in the 70s, there was a gentleman named Bruno Bettelheim who wrote a book called The Uses of Enchantment. And this thesis of that book was essentially that fairy tales help children grapple with the reality of evil in the world in a safe manner, right? They get to learn that evil exists out there, that there are bad things that can happen to us, that there's a wolf that wants to eat us, right? But ultimately, it's resolved, right? And that's what gives children the courage to go out in the world and to try and do good things and to right wrongs and to fight injustice. And if we teach elementary school students, right, that there are systemic inequalities out there and your parents and the adults have no idea how to solve them, right, that's a very disempowering thing to do to young people. We don't want to tell them that, that your classmate over here is going to have much more college debt than you, right? Or that, your grandmother is likely to die in poverty, right, because she has certain factors. Those aren't lessons that we want to teach elementary school students, right? Because we want them to be prepared to go out in the world and wrestle with these challenges, right? And systemic inequalities are existential challenges, right? They depress me, right? I read about them, I think about them, right? And we don't know what to do about them necessarily. So I think we have to organize our education so that we're preparing students to deal with these things, and we introduce these topics at an appropriate stage in their development, which in my thinking is probably at the very earliest in high school. That's it.
Now with that, the speaker is thanked. I gotta say, this is a crowd that has a variety of opinions that oscillate over the affirmative-negative line on this resolution in very interesting ways, and I appreciate it a lot. So thank you for that. We have time for questions for the speaker. Questions for the speaker. Do we have any questions? Yes, the gentleman with the 3 pens now. And we have a mic coming to you.
A lot of play given in the presentations and the questions about education encouraging critical thinking, which I fully endorse. But I also recognize, based on my experience watching what's going on, that there's a whole lot of people who don't see that as a function of education. And the question that I would pose is, how do we confront that? I mean, these are often people who imagine critical race theory in some puristic form that we would call straw men, but it's not straw to them. And so the question is, how do we finesse the problem of students coming to our classes with an echo chamber behind them saying, this is the only way to see the world?
Mr. Speaker?
That's a tough one. I'm not sure.
The chair smiles upon all admissions of not being sure, because the chair himself is not very sure about a lot of things and is grateful to know that he's not the only one.
Well, I think, to be honest with you, one of the things we're trying to do with bringing Braver Angels to this campus is to help students engage in these conversations more comfortably and develop a higher level of comfort in disagreeing with one another. I think much of what you say is correct, is that we have this sort of culture where people live in ideological echo chambers and they don't want to examine their assumptions. And I think that higher education has changed in that regard since I've been involved with it, right? Which is not as long as you, but a pretty long time, right? So I think that, if we can create environments where we are challenging students to question their assumptions, right? And that makes some people uncomfortable, but that's a part of what we do, essentially.
On that note, if any students here are particularly disagreeing with their elders, they are more than welcome to give speeches in disagreement with their elders, should they like. Let's go, let me see. We have time for one more question. Is there any other question for the speaker here? Any further questions? Yes, the gentleman in the black.
I have a quick and simple one, or at least the question is simple. The answers might be more difficult. Both pro and anti, what would be an age where you would teach it, or what age should you absolutely not teach it? That's my question.
Excellent question. Thank you for that, Mr. Speaker.
This is where I should defer to someone who teaches in the secondary, sphere. I think one of the challenges here is also that we're talking about critical race theory as if it's some sort of monolithic thing, right? It's a pool or a school of thinking, and it sort of bleeds. It's not distinct. Even the challenge of policing, knowing when someone was actually teaching critical race theory, I don't know how you'd actually ever police that, right? Because I could teach purely statistical stuff, and I could not invoke any of the founders of critical race theory. Am I teaching critical race theory then? I don't know, right? I mean, we could just look at statistics. Some of the statistics I've just cited, they're not necessarily, they're not part and parcel of critical race theory. They're just analysis of social and racial inequality in our society. But I do think, and this is just my hunch, I guess, probably not till high school, right? I really think that, elementary school is just, it could be debilitating for students just to know that, there are these inequalities, and you have a much greater chance of being successful in this society than I do, purely on the basis of, these characteristics that we can't control. That's a very dispiriting message, I think.
And with that, the speaker and his questioners are thanked. The chair will smile upon the speeches that address this particular policy question here, if anybody's interested in making those further on in this debate. So, with that, we are going to go to another speech in the affirmative. I'm looking for a speech in the affirmative. The gentleman with the excellent gold watch. Here you go, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Have around 4 minutes.
4 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. I'm really
If you're funny, you can go longer, though. So.
all right. Excited to be here. Grateful to be here. I believe critical race theory began way before the 60s, the 50s. Absolutely. So being in my position, my theory, things of it, I'm affirmative for it because, where can I start? I'm going to start here. I got something for you. I thought about this on my way. It crossed my mind. So, how many people in here benefits from racism, interpersonal racism, institutionalized racism, structural racism, internalized racism, internalized racism. Oh, goodness. Oh, talk about anxiety. Inferiority.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
Internalized racial superiority. So from Esau to Jacob, let's go to the 1500s where slavery began. It's not even about slavery at this point, but it's part of racial, it's part of CRT. So from slavery, 1500s to 1866, no, it didn't end right away, 1866. Anything that's forced isn't real. So if you say anything about CRT, I don't even believe in Black History Month. I'm not for it because it's forced. Who said it? You know, if you go back to the beginning, we can go back to Africa or anything of that nature, but in reality, who keeps making these rules? If I go a little bit further, my family, I know, let's say Jacob's family, his family makes about $5,000 a year income tax, and that's a blessing. Like I said, I'm happy to be here. Everybody comes from losses and struggles and pulled themselves up from their bootstraps. But at the end of the day, some people inherited and are beneficiaries of interpersonal, internalized, institutional, structural racism. And so someone said earlier, they had a question, what age is the right age for to talk about it, to teach it? You know, be open-minded about it. It's not elementary, God's sakes, no. And the difference between me and my people or any other person in this position is my mindset, my vision, my values. And no matter what anyone's benefiting from, it doesn't distract me, you know. I'm actually happy for them. I'm really happy for them. I'm happy for everyone that's benefited from slavery, all that stuff. It's a tough pill to swallow, and most people don't have too many pills to swallow on this subject of this matter. They're blind to it. Maybe confirmation bias. Maybe I'm waiting to see who is and who is not, and that's okay. That's me learning myself. But at the same time, for CRT, I went from Jacob and Esau, and then now slavery from the 1500s to the 1800s. Then Jim Crow, and you know, slavery was over. Slavery's years behind us, right? That's what they always say, and that's fine. That's okay. That's accurate. And then they'll mention the Holocaust. Okay, the Holocaust happened, but while the Holocaust was going on, Jim Crow was still alive and well. And even through the Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Movement happened. And that wasn't official until at least the 70s or 80s, and people were still forced to have to go through that and have to decide if they wanted to be for it or even think about it, you know? And that's not fair. But to answer someone's question about what's the right age, I believe it should be a prerequisite in college to talk about this, you know? And as we have to take SATs and ACTs and stuff like that, yeah, if it's that serious and that deep, perhaps they should have to, you know, take tests and, you know, exams over this type of stuff because it's serious. And from elementary to high school, you have all the time to be who you want to be, find out about yourself, learn about yourself, learn and love life. That's the whole point. And then once you get into college, it's a chance to find out other things. Plenty of people, plenty of different majors and degrees. We have to take classes that we don't want to take and go through prerequisites we don't want to go through. And I feel like those are one of the things that we have to do. So why not CRT for a prerequisite in college? Thank you.
And with that, the speakers thank. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Stay standing. We have time for questions for the speaker. Please raise your hand if you have a question for the speaker. I just have a point of clarification. What Jacob and Esau, Esau was the one with the hairy arms, and Jacob was one who put the sheepskin on his arms. Is that correct?
Let's stay on the topic.
The chair rules that in order. Just pure curiosity, that's all. The lady in the red shirt.
So I actually, it's not a question for the speaker, but I'm just going to
I
actually
need you to frame it in the. I need you to frame it in the form of a question. So you can say whatever you're going to say, just as long as you say, and what does the
Okay.
speaker think about that?
Okay. Many years ago, not that many, but years ago when I first moved here, in '85, it was a requirement, a prerequisite to be an educator that you had to take Native American studies. Because there is a large Native American population in this state, and if you're going to be a teacher here, you need to understand the background, correct? And wouldn't the speaker agree that that's exactly what he's trying to say with critical race theory, that it should be a prerequisite, just like Native American history was here? And it is no longer, but it was.
Thank you for that question, ma'am. Mr. Speaker, you can address that however you like.
Absolutely. So, actually, you know what? You actually just triggered something in my head. We can't forget about the Willie Lynch letter. That is something that's very serious as well, and was overlooked. So, the Willie Lynch letter was in 1712. He said for 300 years. That was in 2012, and like I said, you know, some of us, we like, what I enjoy about life today, you can see that a lot of people don't even think about it. You know, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. But that's what I'm saying. Yeah, you're right. That's my, I agree, to say the least. I agree.
Thank you. We have time for further questions for the speaker. Yes, the lady in purple.
Mr. Chairman, I would want to know from this speaker whether he would consider it appropriate for this concept or theory, I will use theory, to be introduced at a younger age than university, and maybe even younger than high school, but be introduced in an age-appropriate way. Similarly to, say, we teach maths, and we teach algorithms up here at this level, but down here we teach 1 + 1 equals whatever, 2. And so therefore...
that is in fact the case, that 1 + 1 = 2.
Thank you. I'm, you know, doddering age and all. Anyway, so could it not be then taught in an age-appropriate way so that the theory is introduced and the process of education is illumination?
Thank you. Please remain standing, Mr. Speaker. Please remain standing, ma'am.
So as, you know, we have presidents in the United States, right? Just follow along, please, as close as you can. We have presidents, and they have policies that are still in, like, you know, in play, that they're not here anymore. You know, they're gone. They're in a better place or wherever they need to be, you know. And okay, so it's not like I said earlier, Black history is forced. Everything that we went through from slavery, we, as in the people, everyone, the people that benefited from it and the people that suffered it, it was all forced. So nothing's been real. And if I have to go to school and listen to something that I don't want to listen to, I have no clue about, and like, I mean, even if I don't have a clue about it, like there's policies and laws that I have no clue about, but someone made it before they checked out and went to another place. It's no different. Like, but once I grow up and I reach 21 or 18, I learned about it. You know, so I mean, it's no different. I don't want my, like, no one wants their children to have to go through something they wasn't a part of, you know? Even if they benefited from it or suffered from it, you know, we want to keep it in the past, but it's also important enough to have to learn about it eventually, you know? But once you cross that bridge, It's kind of like teaching about the birds and the bees or anything of that nature, you know? It's just a time and a place for everything. And you want somebody to be fully aware or a little bit more mature to be able to take it in, because even if you put it in a cartoon, it's nothing to joke about or laugh about. No matter how self-affirming we make it, we need to take it seriously 100%.
And with that, the speaker and his questioners are thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Excellent speech. Thank you for all this. All right, we are now going to go to another speech in the negative. Is there another speech in the negative? The lady in yellow, in the Mitchell T-shirt. You have about 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I first want to start by recognizing that we are currently sitting on stolen land, according to Native Land Archives. This is actually previously Yankton Sioux land. So one of the things is there's different definitions of critical race theory, and I feel like through the discussion, not just necessarily today, but in society, it's been hijacked. So I'm going to use it more as, I'm going to address the issues of basically racism, teaching racism within public schools. And I believe we should be teaching racism in public schools at age-appropriate levels, including in elementary school. And when we talk about we want to protect our children, when we protect our children, and we want to fairy tales, we don't want to scare them. What we're actually talking about is we want to protect white children. We want to protect white children because children of color, including my sons, don't have that privilege of not hearing about scary things that are happening because of the color of their skin. My children have to experience that, and when we talk about, I don't want children to know that this is happening in our society, unfortunately my sons do not have that privilege. And so I think it's best to educate, and I will tell you that there's great education going around. It's not labeled as critical race theory. My son is in first grade, and actually for several years, because both of my sons have had the same first grade teacher, she has taught something called creative artists and creative role models. And so some of the creative role models she talks about is Jason Reynolds, Stevie Wonder, Kwame Alexander, and she doesn't call them black role models, she calls them creative role models. And I think one of the best things that we can do for all of our children is educate them about role models just in general and make sure we integrate all the great, diverse, amazing role models we have and include them. So this teacher has been doing, who's a veteran teacher in our school system, is integrating people who are great role models who happen to be black or who happen to be Native, and it's not just something of let's talk about black role models only. I also am not a huge fan of Black History Month because I think it should be integrated into regular history and throughout other months. We should be talking about it all year. One of the things I do want to talk about is racism is not a theory in my experience, and in fact, there are quite a few facts. And one of my favorite the studies I like to talk about are ones where it's equal and it's obvious, because when I talk to people about, well, black people's income at a lower level, they like to use a lot of qualifications, but this is why or this is why. So a couple things that always stand out to me is job applicants with white-sounding names were called back 50% more of the time than applicants with black-sounding names, and they had the exact same resume. Black people are convicted. Black people are convicted are 20% more likely to be sentenced to jail than white people, and 20% longer sentences than white people when they're convicted of the exact same crime. And then lately, when it comes to things like house appraisals, a black couple got their house appraised in Maryland recently, $472,000. And then that exact same house they had a couple who's white as their friends, portraying that as their house, and that exact same appraisal for that exact same house came back as $750,000. So I just think this is something that we need to also establish facts, and systemic racism is a fact, and I think it's important to do it at all age levels, but obviously make it age appropriate.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. We have time for questions for the speaker. Please raise your hand if you have a question. Is that a question? Oh, no worries. Question, yeah. The lady in the, I love the pattern, I have no idea what to call it. I apologize.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Business and industry has been telling us for years that we need to be creating kind of a next future group of children, educating children to have conflict resolution skills, empathy for others, the ability to work well in groups, critical thinking skills. So I'm wondering if the speaker would agree that by introducing these concepts in an age-appropriate manner early with children helps them build those skills, which makes them more productive citizens and creates a more productive overall workforce and nation.
Madam Speaker,
Sure.
you can address that however you like.
I would absolutely agree that that's very important, and I think education is what keeps. I've had the privilege to travel for my job to other countries. I've lived in Atlanta. I've lived in more diverse communities, but not everyone, I realize, has that privilege. And education is what is the big equalizer, and by teaching different cultures, different perspectives, that's how we give the most robust education. And part of that is other countries and other cultures, teaching other cultures also helps with empathy, and I absolutely agree that's great for the workforce.
Do we have more questions for the speaker? Yes. The lady in the black blouse. The former speaker.
Yes. So I have a question for the speaker regarding a lesson that I had the opportunity to observe a video on when I was a student here long, long ago. And the lesson was old too, and it was so appropriate for elementary kids. I'm wondering if the speaker has ever come across it, and it is Jane Elliott's Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes experiment, which is excellent for teaching about racism and discrimination and things like that. And I still use the video of that study today in my classes, so I'm wondering if the speaker has heard of that and if she thinks that would be one of those age-appropriate things to teach about this.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And please remain standing.
I think we're talking about the same thing, but I believe so, yes. And I think that would be appropriate, age-appropriate instruction.
And with that, the speaker and her questioners are thanked. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. All right, we still have time for a couple of speeches, and so I'm going to be looking for another speech in the affirmative, or also what we call a speech on the topic. So a speech on the topic is where you give a speech that is not necessarily strongly one way or the other, but involves you being willing to stand up here and mull on some questions you might have about the very subject itself in front of everybody and then be questioned on it. And those make some of the most fascinating speeches as well. So I'm looking for either a speech in the affirmative or a speech on the topic. Please feel free to raise your hands if you are interested in giving a speech in the affirmative or on the topic. Yes, sir. The gentleman with the gold pin on his lapel. So. I also want to note that you young folks here, students and others, are more than welcome to talk if you like. And I promise you that this is a space that's as much as for you as for anyone. So, sir, you have around 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. In my profession, it's often been, we've often been accused that we can't even clear our throats in 4 minutes. So I'll attempt to be brief.
Oh, sir, is this a speech in the affirmative or on the topic?
I can go either way.
Then
Let's call it on the topic.
Great, great.
How many of you remember Senator Everett Dirksen? That'll show how old you are. How many of you remember Senator Everett Dirksen appearing at a Republican National Convention and tearing up his notes and throwing them on the floor because he couldn't explain the budget or the platform any longer? I don't remember when that was, but you remember it. That's where I'm at today. My feelings on this topic have been all over the board as we've listened to this discussion. And I think that's probably valuable because that's the whole purpose of this exercise. The single largest concern I have, however, is that critical race theory was developed by legal academics at Harvard, Columbia, New York University, Seattle University, and a variety of other law schools. And based on my profession and based on the limited knowledge that I have of critical race theory, I think one of the things that we've missed in this whole discussion is that we recognize there is racism. We recognize that civil rights have not been completely, fully recognized in our system, and that we are all troubled by it. But the singularly largest problem that I believe we have with critical race theory today is the fact that it has become polarized and used as an excuse to not address the fundamental difficult problems we have with systemic racism baked into the system of laws, rules, regulations, and social policies in the United States of America. So I would hope that through this discussion, we can wrench ourselves away from pedagogy, and I use that term without actually being able to define it because I'm not an educator. But we've talked a lot about educating children, what the right age to introduce difficult subjects is. I'm a child of the 60s, growing up in very turbulent times. And I've been discussing racism, race relations, systemic racism built into our laws, systems, policies, and institutions for the last 60 years. I'm tired of talking. It's time for action. The words that we all spew, the pablum that we address, has not fixed the fundamental problem. So let's depolarize the discussion, recognize the need for debate, and move forward to positive solutions. And the only way we can reach those positive solutions is to recognize the problem and do the hard work of wrestling with it, which we're doing tonight, and I thank you very much for this program.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Stay standing, though. We have time for questions for the speaker. Do we have any questions for the speaker? Yes, the gentleman in the blue shirt.
I would simply ask, Mr. Chair, I would ask the speaker, what is the fundamental problem?
Thank you. I was about to ask the same thing. Please remain standing. Mr. Speaker, you may address that however you like.
The fundamental problem is that we discuss the United States of America as being this wonderful experiment, but altogether too often at this point in our history, we believe the experiment is done. We have barely begun to reach the aspirations that have been discussed and adopted by the founders. We've given that lip service for 250 years, whatever it is, but we have not moved to fulfill that dream, those aspirations. And in fact, in a political context, broadly across the United States, and not to be too terribly locally accusatory, even in this state, we have moved backwards rather than moving forwards. We're preferring not to address the problem, and we're preferring not to follow the aspirations of our founders under the guise of we don't want to teach divisive subjects. We don't want to challenge children at an appropriate age with appropriate questions about their presumptions and their beliefs. That goes back to the critical thinking that we need to undertake. But we need to meet the aspirations of the founders. Not talk about how great the founders were, but really look at what they wrote. Believe that what they wrote they meant, and take the steps to fulfill that meaning.
Thank you, Mr. Questioner. We have time for one more question for the speaker. Yes, the gentleman in the blue jacket.
I'd like to ask the speaker, I'm sure he knows very well, that we are right near an elementary school called L.B. Williams, and he was an African-American gentleman who was the mayor of Mitchell for how many years, was it? Many years, 10, 12 years, and his wife just passed away recently. A well-respected member of this community. And so there are very interesting examples where in our community we have this extraordinary example of community goodwill and being able to produce a genuinely colorblind system. And I don't know what role those kinds of examples might play in providing a way to move forward in some of these issues. That there are instances where people are clearly able to thrive and be an influence even as a person of race, of color.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, you can address that however you like.
My response to that would be the first two people I met when I moved to Mitchell in 1982 were Bud and Bonnie Williams sitting in the pews at the Congregational Church. Known them very well for, how long have I been here now? 42 years or something like that. And there are probably people in this room who knew Bud and Bonnie better than me. I'll admit that. But I ask you to ponder for a moment why Bud and Bonnie didn't have any children. That answers the question loudly by silence. We are an accepting community, but the rest of the world was not so accepting, and I understand that a choice was made not to put people through what they had been through. Bud and Bonnie may be up there shaking their heads and saying, "You're full of it, that isn't what we said," but that's what I understand.
And with that, the speaker and his questioners are thanked for their help.
Thank you. I'll pick up my trash.
That is also very much in order. Thank you for being a good model for all of us.
In case you think I was fibbing, I did have notes.
We have time, I think, for one last speech. If anybody would like to give a last speech on the topic. If anybody's interested in giving a last speech on the topic, I see one of our tech guys is interested in giving a last speech. Come up here, sir. You have up to 4 minutes.
So I'm new to this, so bear with me. Thank you. If you tell a big enough lie and repeat it, eventually people will start to believe it. I don't think the man who said that was a great man, but the quote rings true. There are some, reporting stations and news networks and whatnot who does try to convince some people that CRT is this big bad boogie monster who's going to walk up to 8-year-old Timmy and say, well, no, you're white, so you're bad and you should feel bad, and you go over there and cry in the corner. And I don't believe that's entirely accurate. I do think this is something that can and should be taught in schools. Parents aren't always right, and they don't try to be wrong when they tell you or teach you things, whether it's directly or indirectly. When I was growing up, and no flack against my parents, they're wonderful people and I love them, but I didn't know any better that all Mexicans aren't lazy. How was I supposed to know? I was a little 8-year-old Alec, right? I didn't know any either, right? But that was just kind of the vibe I got from the deeply ingrained racism that kind of is there. And eventually, obviously, I don't believe this now, but when you're young and you're told these things, or you kind of get the vibe of these things, you just believe it as fact. And you kind of need somebody there to say, hey, maybe that's not true. Maybe this other thing isn't true either. Let's have a conversation about this. Let's talk about this in obviously an age-appropriate way. A lot of people brought that up. And I think it can be done. We do have very competent teachers in the state, this country, our community, and I think they can do it. I have more to say, but I forgot it, so I guess I'm done.
And with that, the speaker is thanked for his excellent and heartfelt speech. We have time for questions for the speaker. Questions for the speaker. Does anybody have any questions for the speaker? I have a question. Does the speaker remember the stuff he was about to say at the end before he forgot it? I'm kidding.
I will when it's done, just not now.
Any questions for the speaker? All right, well, with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for that. I think seeing as the hour is late, but not late enough yet, we can squeeze in one more if anybody else has a speech. I'm giving you all this opportunity to speak if you like. We've had a couple young people, but we have some other ones who are welcome to speak if they are interested in it. So, do we have a last speech? Yes. The lady in the floral dress, or the floral blouse. You have around 4 minutes.
Okay, thanks. This is just a speech on the topic. I am a teacher at LB Williams, and I just have a lot of thoughts. It was really interesting to hear everyone's thoughts on that, because I think it's really important. As a teacher, I really am conscious of the kids will believe what you tell them because they love you. And so I'm really make sure that like when I'm saying my own opinions, I am saying them in a host of others. Like, this is what some people believe, this is what other people believe, this is what some people believe, and I try not to tell them what I personally believe on many topics, and give them that variety of just exposures of ideas. I grew up in California, and I've just been here for a few years, and I love California. I love here too, but I think I had the benefit of being exposed to a lot of different types of people in my community. I grew up in an area where we had, and taught in an area where we had probably like, 15 different cultures in our school, different languages, all kinds of different races. And so I feel like I have always been surrounded by people of many different races, and I think that has really helped me to learn and to grow, especially friends that have told me their experience that I had not had. And so learning about those things has been really beneficial for me. And I just think it's important for us to get exposed to different types of people. And one idea I've seen recently is in Denmark, there's something called a human library. And they have people who are available to get checked out for like a half-an-hour conversation. So there's like an area set up where you can check out somebody who is a different race than you, and you go and have a conversation in an area for 30 minutes, and you can ask them questions and hear about their experience. So it could be something like a Holocaust survivor, it could be a different career, a different race, a different age, a different sexuality, whatever it is that you are interested in learning about, because I think it's very hard to hate people once you know them personally. And so I think learning about who someone is a really important aspect of this topic. And so once we hear how other people are handling things, what they have gone through, it gives us, I think, the motivation to, like someone else said, to make a change and to stop just talking about it, but to do something. Because when you know someone who's had a negative experience because of any of those factors, it makes you step in and be an advocate for them. So I think that's really important, and thank you.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. We have time for one question for the speaker, if anyone has one. And oh, yes, sir, in the blue shirt.
A question I would, Mr. Chair, the question I would have for this speaker, and actually all of the speakers this evening, is one of the previous speakers spoke about we need to get to a point where we could do the proper research. And it's been talked about by several of the speakers that we tend to live in echo chambers. How do we move away from that? How do we move to a place where it's okay to check out somebody that's of a different opinion and talk with them and realize they don't have to be my enemy? I'm a pastor of a church in town that I like to tell people, I have a member of my church that used to be the chair of the Republican Party for Davison County, and I have a member of my church that used to be the chair for the Democratic Party of Davison County. And I like that, and they're friends even, and it's great. How do we get to that point again?
Excellent question, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I think a lot of it has to be on us to make the effort. I think you have to go outside of what you're comfortable with, go outside of what you're interested in. I mean, it could be things like watching several different news stations or reading several different types of newspapers. It could be visiting, like if you're in the church community, visiting different denominations of churches. It could be joining an activity that has people, that's filled with people that you wouldn't normally see anywhere else. I have a lot of friends in this community that I do not agree with in lots of ways. And we are able to just talk about them. And I love asking people, well, what brought you to that place? Why do you have that thought? Why do you have that opinion? Where did that come from? And then it helps me to understand, for one, and to support them. Whether I agree with them or not, I can still be their friend. I can still support them. So I think it's really on us to get outside of our bubble in whatever that looks like, whether it's on the internet, whether it's through personal interactions, but I think it's on us to look for it.
All right, and with the time coming out, we are going to have to cut it off here, but thank you very much for that speech, Madam Speaker. I will note before we adjourn that I noticed that in this debate there were many strong speeches in the affirmative and in the negative and on the topic. Among the speeches in the affirmative, we didn't have what you might call a full ringing condemnation of critical race theory, and if there's anybody in this room who feels like that is their opinion, I just want you to know, and just keep this in mind for future debates, that we would have treated you just as well as everybody else spoke here. We're entirely serious when we say that this is a space where we do want all voices here, and all voices at all levels are welcome to speak on this format here. So with that, we have to do the most important part of this debate in just one moment. But before we can do that, we have to adjourn. After I tap the gavel and we adjourn, we are going to adjourn, but then we'll do a quick debrief, and the debrief, again, is the most important part, so don't go away. So, with that, I am looking for a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I move we adjourn.
Do we have a second to that motion? With that, I call this debate out of order. You are more than welcome to just call me Luke and insult each other in second-person pronouns as much as you like. And you now no longer need to use the microphone. Just raise your hand and shout out your answers to these two questions. What did you learn, and what did you enjoy? Anybody, what did you learn, or what did you enjoy? Yes?
I enjoyed hearing all the positivity from the educators.
What did you learn, what did you enjoy? Anybody? And also, even if you didn't speak, but you listened to a lot of this stuff, feel free to say what you learned or enjoyed too. Yes, Joel?
I just really enjoyed coming in because standing up there and making the speech just warmed my heart.
It was a great speech too, by the way, so thank you for making it. What do you learn or enjoy? Yes, Mr. Radio Guy.
Right, considering my profession, I have had an absolutely wonderful evening. This is the kind of thing I would like to see at other public meetings where we can discuss instead of throw bombs.
Thank you for having contributed to it. What did you learn? What did you enjoy? What did you learn or enjoy? Did you learn or enjoy anything? What did you learn and what did you enjoy? Yes, sir.
The emphasis on the word theory,
Mm-hmm.
to me, it was like, yeah, that was refreshing, other than we're always signs of claiming this is truth. Theory, that was helpful.
Alethea, what did you learn? What did you enjoy? Also, the term checking out someone of different political opinions for you. Braver Angels has not yet started a red-blue dating service, but once we hit sufficient levels of financial precarity, that will likely be on the table. So, yeah. What did you learn? What did you enjoy? Anybody else? Anybody here?
I would just like to say that I hope as more of these events occur, that both Braver Angels and Dakota Wesleyan do a little better job promoting it to the public. I happened across this quite by accident Monday, and I'm glad I did.
I'm glad you did too, and we will take that into account and make sure to look a little bit harder into that on all the subsequent debates that we're doing. So, learn or enjoy anything? Was that a hand in the back? Anybody learn or enjoy anything else here? All right, well with that, let me just give a big thank you to everybody who spoke and everybody who bared their souls out in public forum. This is something that our society and our culture right now do not really encourage us to do at a level of humanity and earnestness and respect for all of our fellow citizens. And the reason I chair these debates, the reason I was so excited to start working on the Braver Angels debate team is that it always gives me a little bit of hope whenever I come through these. There's a very real way that the best parts of America are all about conversations, and I think it is always good to be in these little pockets of the country and be sharing the floor with my fellow Americans, talking about things that are important to all of us. So Braver Angels is the nation's largest grassroots-led, fully red-blue civic organization dedicated to helping Americans across all political, cultural, social, etc. divides find the value in each other, and to do that by practicing the habits of discourse, of empathy, of humility, of magnanimity, of charity that can help us to prize our relationships with people over our politics, to have our politics but have our relationships too, to rebuild the foundations of social trust that this great chorus of the Union, that this great American experiment has always fundamentally been based on and always will if it's to be anything worth itself. in due time. And you all have just participated in the sort of debate format that we do with college students all over America, that we do with sometimes the staffs of state legislators and congressmen, that we do with community organizations all across the country, and that we hope to be doing more and more and more and more. And as we approach the next greatest and most terrifying and most divisive American election in our lifetimes in 2024, all we're going to be doing is exactly the same stuff that you just saw here, and stuff inspired in similar spirits, because we really fully believe that when everything else in society is telling us not to walk this line and not to have conversations and see each other in honest ways, that's when it's most important to do it, even when it's the loudest and scariest and hardest to do. And so if you're looking for another way in American politics in 2024 and all the years beyond that, we at Braver Angels will be excited to join you in that. And Joel has been a great partner for us here at Dakota Wesleyan and Mitchell for a while. And if you're looking for ways to get involved with Braver Angels nationally, starting at home, I think he's looking for some help and some partnership in helping see what Braver Angels can do here on this little spot of the High Plains. So with that, I will look forward to seeing all of you at the next Braver Angels debate here at Dakota Wesleyan sometime in the fall. And in the meantime, I will look forward to hearing what happens with subsequent debates that the student groups around here are planning. So thank you everybody for being out here today. And Joel, let me turn it back to you.
Let everybody know, just as kind of a funny point of history, Luke used to work, before he came on with Braver Angels, for the Richard Nixon Foundation in California, and now he is working with the McGovern Center, so I think George won after all. So have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody, and good night.